Excellent. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm a partner in Malcolm Company, a team that supports global enterprise to advance their 3D pipelines. Today, I'll be introducing Jonathan Beals and his incredible journey at Nike, where he developed the virtual materials studio and the way that Nike thinks about virtual materials. I won't introduce you too much right now because it'll be at the beginning of the talk. We're going to leave it with time at the end for questions. And I'll make sure that I don't give away too much of the plot at the beginning. And so stay with me while we wind up into the story of Nike's last 10 years. And just for context, in case you haven't got to meet Jonathan yet, he is now a free and independent man, and so is able to have a more liberal conversation than he may have otherwise had about 5 months ago. So think about that when you're coming to your questions at the end. Professionally, non-personally. Gutters. Okay. Before you got into Nike, you were in the VFX space. Can you tell us a little bit about the beginning of your journey into virtual materials?
Yeah. So I started in commercials and visual effects, really harnessing look development, lighting. It was a small studio that I was involved in, and I ended up being a jack of all trades and having to understand, how do I scale this pipeline? How do I work in it? How do I use this render farm that no one's heard of because it's put together with paper clips and toothpicks?
That's the context is 2010.
Yeah. So this is about 2010 to 2014 area. And so I ended up really loving that world. And my entire plan in that world was to go into the usual path and get into Disney and ILM and Weta and all these big film studios. And so I was so excited with that. And then I did a crazy thing and got married. And I realized that was no longer the path that I wanted to take. And so I needed to figure out how else I can use these skills that I harnessed. And that's when I learned about product. And I really had no idea about product before that.
So for additional context and introducing you to Jonathan, you're in Portland, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the Pacific Northwest. You got a lot of talent. And there's a certain constraint around opportunities. For those who aren't from the Bay Area, this is a known problem. If you're in the Bay Area, there's an abundance of opportunities when you have this type of talent. Something happened and you decided to make a change. And I believe it was a family member who connected you to an opportunity in the Oregon area.
Yeah, that's right. So my father-in-law actually worked at Nike. And this is how naive I was. I had no idea that Nike was even doing anything with 3D, and he knew I needed a different job. And so he's like, well, just send me your portfolio and resume and I'll shop it around and see what happens. And so I was like, well, all right, here you go. Not thinking anything of it. And then the next week I get a call and I go in and interview for it. And then within the following week, I received this job offer, and I still had no contact. So it was actually for a 3D design position. So not even look development, really on the modeling side. And that ended up being incredibly fortuitous and just an incredible opportunity. And I was really at the forefront of it, really within the first dozen employees at Nike hired to work within 3D design.
Right. So you have this earlier childhood ambition of like ILM and Star Wars. You're in Portland, Oregon. Got married. Father-in-law says, "Hey, just send me a resume." The sneaker brand says, "Come on over." And there's like a couple of other people around there like tooling around in 3D. And so, for a little bit of context at that time, what tools are you using? What problems are they trying to solve? What's the scope of work for that little team at that time?
Yeah, so the problems that we were trying to solve is to solve a lot of the complex design challenges that were happening through 3D modeling. And so really at that time, it was really focused on the 3D modeling and 3D printing aspects of the pipeline. There was really no visualization. There was really no rendering. And it was really focused around computational outsoles of the underparts of your sneakers and trying to create better visualizations of that, because that was extremely hard to communicate with the factories through traditional 2D CADs. And so that was the primary focus at that time, was really building these complex models to send as a communication device through the rest of Nike using 3D printing mechanisms.
And they didn't quite know who they had put into their house. I'm going to then fast forward, and we're going to come back to some of like what happened along the way. So take us now to 2023, 2024. 10 years have gone by.
Yeah.
What did you build over 10 years? And like sort of the TLDR, the unit, the volumes of materials, render engines, tools that were created. So I just want to skip to the end a little bit, like a movie, and I'm going to then get back to how we got to here.
Yeah, so at the end, I was in charge of a 30-plus person team that was only focused on virtual materials and visualization. We were generating over $50 million in business added revenue for the company. We had teams across the world, 3 different continents. We had over 14,000 materials in our library. We were scanning over 500 materials a month. We were also creating several hundred new materials using Substance Designer and other techniques for concepting and then new innovations. And so that was really focused on the visualization side. We were partnering very closely with our 3D production side and helping them scale up their capabilities as well. And they focus on the modeling side of those things. And then early on, we were utilizing more offline rendering like V-Ray. And then near the end, we started to really take advantage of real-time render engines with Unreal and more web-enabled render engines as well to take advantage of real-time capabilities and faster iterations and being able to provide real-time concepts to internal stakeholders.
Beautiful. So you can imagine, a VFX artist gets hired in a brand, clothing apparel, obviously like these sneaker brand around the world. 10 years later, there's a whole business unit that's thinking very differently about 3D. But there's not quite the means to communicate fundamental issues. And so over time, when you're in VFX, you're a little less constrained around like physics. You want something to glow, you make it glow. And Nike, that's simply not the case. Mm-hmm. And so tell us a little bit about like fundamental problems of like dealing with light from the manufacturer to the customer who's buying the product.
Yeah, so as you can see here's some renders that we did with the Nike. So all these are 3D renders and these are photographs. And we were really inspired by IKEA's journey and their level of fidelity. And so we were really actively trying to hit the same bar at the same scale that they were doing. And once you get into this world, you quickly realize how complex and challenging the space is and how different it is from your typical film and visual effects workflow. And visual effects you want it to look either stylized or photoreal, and you do whatever you can to get that to look that way. In product, we don't have that luxury. And we don't even necessarily want, our goal is not to make it look good. Our goal is to make it look accurate and accurate to the product. And that is extremely challenging when you have incredibly complex spectral responses and materials and lights and colors, and even on the physical standards of materials. Just for context, Nike has in the film world, or really in many other worlds, you would say, oh, that material with that color, we're going to scan that, or we're going to use a tax out, we're going to use a Visu, we're going to use whatever technology is, we're going to adjust it and make it look right. You can't really do that when you have 100,000 materials and thousands of color potentials for one material. You've got like 100,000 to the 1,000th power there. There's no way you can possibly scan all those materials. But in the end, you need it to look accurate, and you need to be able to have your stakeholders, your vendors be able to trust it. And so that was extremely challenging.
And why is that? Why is that so important for the customer?
Yeah. So at Nike, the second most popular reason my product was returned is because of color. It was right after fit. So it is a literal $100 million problem that we need to solve. And if we don't get the color right, it becomes very challenging, and people, and especially if we're now selling on, Amazon or other sites, there becomes even legal issues with that if the product isn't matching the color. And it gets extremely complicated when you are visualizing the product under one light source at the factory, another light source in your photo studio, another light source in your photography for .com, and then another one when you're trying to design the product. And so there's so many points of failure for this, and so many different interpretations of what that color is and what the material is, that it becomes a logistical nightmare.
Perfect segue. And so, this is SIGGRAPH. This is the graphics audience. Let's get real deep on light for a moment here. So VFX background, understand what these tools are about. At Nike, I haven't quite got into it yet, but like all the DCCs and render engines with, the swoosh behind you to go find the best, right? These are athletes. They're focused on performance. Accuracy is everything. We got scale. Now, tell me a little bit about, I got this light problem.
Yeah, so this is perfectly illustrated in the images on the left. If you look up at the top, that's one light source. You look at it and oh yeah, everything is, orange, it's kind of muted, it's grayed out, and then you turn on a different light source and you're like, oh, well, those are different colors. Which one's right? Which one's true? What does this actually look like? And then that gets into a whole psychological problems like how your eyes and how your cones react to color and how that's different. And are you seeing the same color I'm seeing? How is this reacting? How are these materials reacting under the color? And then you add into, fluorescent agents into these materials and how that metamerizes under different light sources like these colors are doing. And so it becomes just an extraordinarily challenging side only on the physical materials before you ever try to digitally capture something. And so on the right side, this is compounded by how even the devices that we have to visualize color and how that's not very well standardized. It's so much better now than what it was, but your phone versus your monitor versus how you see physically with your eyes, they're all limited by different types of gamuts. And even the material has a different gamut that it's limited by. And so even if you get everything right and you nail the spectral response and you're using a spectral render engine and you got your D65 and everything is programmed correctly, you're going to have your customer that's going to be looking at it on their iPhone with a fluorescent t-shirt out in the sunlight and saying that the color's not right. And so that provides a massive challenge for us to overcome too, of how do we control the uncontrollable.
Can you talk a bit about the bane of your existence?
Yeah. So I don't need to raise of hands, but I'm sure that most of us at one point or the other have been in our existence. That was also our passion. Instead of a relationship, mine was a industry. And yeah, so it's the virtual materials is, I love it. It is such a deep passion of myself to be able to understand this at that molecular level of understanding how we can do this at scale, what technologies, what pipelines we can implement for this. And it's also an extraordinarily complex industry. I mean, the geometry is one thing and optimization is one thing, and then you get into materials, and then you get into the interactions, and then you get into just perceptually how everyone sees it. And it became such a frustrating space because there's so little education about it and there's such little understanding about it. And so we would have we work with designers who were looking at the designs that we were creating, and they're saying this color isn't right. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, well, we want more green or we want more red. But it's right. You're like, well, no, I mean, it's looking too much this way. You're like, what are you talking about? And so you go over to their desk and they've got a bright window behind them and they're wearing a bright green t-shirt that's reflecting off the monitor, and that understanding is, even with these exceptionally talented designers, is just not there. And even them are at an elite level compared to the rest of the population that just does not understand this. And so that's really the bane of my existence right there.
Well said. Let's shift gears a little bit. So the problem is well defined, high level of complexity, manufacturers of the material all the way through, elite team members at a global brand looking at their monitors, and then the customer who's returning product because the color that landed at their door is different than the color that was on the website that they purchased from. Over 10 years, I use a lot of different tools to try to solve for this. Talk me through a little bit about what worked, what didn't, and like where you concluded over time to solve for that 3D pipeline.
Yeah. So the challenge, one of the biggest challenges that we have to solve, that we still have to solve for, is that every render engine, every technology, everything that is in existence interprets materials, textures, colors differently. So you can't have a standard of truth that looks amazing in the software that you're rendering in, and then you have to get into 5 other softwares for your different clients that all need to work in a different software, and then all of a sudden everything goes out the window. Now your colors don't look right, your textures aren't mapped correctly, maybe the textures are missing because it just can't read it, and so then you get into this really complex transformational pipeline of, okay, well, we're working in V-Ray, we need to get into Unreal. How do we create this transformation that actually transforms this? So we need to get into Babylon, or we need to get it into Model View, or what are these things? And then each one, of course, looks completely different from each other. But they also have to look the same for the customer to be able to trust it. And so that's an area that we really struggled with, and we ended up doing a lot of customized transformations after the fact. And so we built a lot of things using the Substance Automation Toolkit that would transform materials for different endpoints and put custom transformations in it to visually be more accurate to what that render engine does, knowing that that is a very hard solution to scale, right? Because if that render engine ever decides, hey, we're going to change our GTR format for this GGX we're just going to tweak the tail fall off a little bit, now your entire map is completely off, and then you got to roll back the software, and then you got to figure out what's going on, and then re-upload, and re-update tens of thousands of materials, and that's a logistical nightmare as well. And so we also realized that a lot of our customers valued speed over that nth degree of accuracy on the design side, but they value that nth degree accuracy on the product side. And so we ended up pivoting really to working in Unreal on the design side to be able to iterate quickly. And that proved a ton of challenges as well, because real time is not really real time when you still want accurate shadows and all these other complex behaviors within it. And then even within that, how do you accurately and in real time limit the gamut of your colors? And so, a big example is if you apply the same blue on a suede versus the leather versus the cotton, that blue shows up completely different, but you only have one blue. So then how do you algorithmically ensure that that is at least close to the desired output without having to measure it 3 different times?
I'm hearing the Q&A engine swirling in the room. So we're going to conclude quickly here so I can get out to the audience. You just described a bunch of the lack of alignment. Internal to a global brand, you're going to have the designers, the product people, the commerce, web, mobile teams. So different stakeholders are going to have different specs. Somehow you got to do them all. You were describing like Unreal over time became a bit of a source of truth with a bunch of rework. The gamut, as you described, depends on from iPhone to a widescreen monitor in office. And of course, we've got the, various forms of complexity, multidimensional. Walk us through a little bit about where you see things going. And if your team trying to figure out this level of complexity, how do you want to think about it?
Yeah. Great question. I think a lot of that hinges on all of what we hold core to our mission here of open standards. And so continuing our path here of really opening up these transformational and these open source file exchange formats. I think that ever since Blender came out many years ago of having a free software, I think that blew up the doors for companies of being able to have proprietary file formats. I think that unique value proposition is what that software can uniquely do to keep their users engaged and paying for the software, and they can offer their unique design experience, or they can offer their unique capabilities that other softwares can't do. But I think the world is changing to where you no longer can only work in one software, and no one wants to do that. They want to be able to get their materials, their objects out and exchanged in different softwares, and be able to have that be a seamless design experience. So that's one of the aspects that we obsess at Nike, is that it's got to have an incredible user and incredible design experience attached to it. It just can't be this tech that only programmers know how to work in. It's got to be user friendly. And so continuing things like this, I also think that these open standards, GLTF, USC, they're great starts, but we're just not there yet. A lot of these are catered, rightfully so, to a lot of these creative endpoints and films and game studios and those things. And product is very similar, and we're using the same technologies in a similar way, but they're very different endpoints. Where instead of looking good, we're accurate. And so how do we continue to transform and work within these file formats to be able to offer new technology, so then when we capture a thing, that thing is that thing. Even like looking at new technologies that are coming out with Nurse. How does this relate to USC and GLTF, and how can we edit these things, and how can we provide good user experiences that have great UI design, that offer these advanced capabilities, that can do these variants, that can do a lot of these cool things, but have an accurate product at the end of it. Another aspect here is really having domain experts that focus on implementing these workflows. So a lot of these businesses like Nike, like the targets, like these really large businesses, a lot of them, this new 3D technology is completely new to them, and a lot of them don't even know who to hire or what they're looking for, and so often they'll hire the wrong talent, and then it takes years off of their potential. And so being able to have consultants that are experts in these pipeline designs and workflows and the technologies and their capabilities to be able to go in and provide insights in how this can get ramped up is going to be crucially available. I mean, this was alone $100 million problem to Nike. So if you imagine you being a business person saying, hey, if you pay me $10 million, I can guarantee that you'll recoup $100 million on this. You got to be a pretty crazy business person to say no to that. And so it's definitively $1 billion problem that these product companies are in desperate need to solve for, because Nike's not alone in this. There's company after company that needs to find a way to be able to deliver accurate product in a variety of different formats for a variety of different customers in a variety of different countries that all react to product differently, that all have different requirements, that all see and think and process differently. And so really being able to think through how we can continue to transform this pipeline and democratize it and open it up is going to only allow faster innovation and faster progress for us all. So accurate versus product. Even rethinking what virtual product is and virtual materials are. Historically, it's always been this shader and this math formula that textures are fit to a BSDF. Is that the right way to think about this moving forward? Are there more complex mechanisms that we can employ to really think about this? Because even within this format, everything is so pieced out and separate, especially color. Color is hardly thought about in this. And there's open color, and there's color IO, and there's some other things in here, but that is still just scratching the surface and does not take into account the spectral responses of color and power distributions of light sources and the really interesting things of this. And so we've kept this technology for just eons, and very similar to FPX. It feels like with the USD and GLTF really gaining traction, there's a great moment here to really rethink and redefine how this can look for in the product space. And then,
that's a perfect place to pause for questions.
Yeah, perfect.
That particular statement. Let's make a quick transition here.